Welcome back, everyone, to Season 3 of Catalyze Your Self. I am Gayatri, and with this episode, we are kicking off our Season 3. Here, we will continue to dive deep into the layers of our mind so we remain strongly with ourselves, regardless of where life takes us. And for those of us who've been on this journey with me since Season 1, and for those of us joining for the very first time, this season continues our exploration of what it truly means to stay connected to ourself so we can remain steady under pressure. Pressure is something that all of us experience. Being born into this world inherently brings pressure our way. It can be obvious and dramatic, like a crisis or a high-stakes scenario, and it can also be covert, insidious, and it shows up quietly, woven into our everyday life. Pressure can build quietly when our responsibilities start stacking up, when we find ourselves making one too many serious or extensively impactful decisions, or even the pace we learn to keep because slowing down doesn't feel like an option. And when we operate in this pressure scenario for extended periods of time, even if our performance for the external world is on point, a shift typically starts inside of us, inside our mind, inside our nervous system and body. Because pressure has a way of changing how we move through our inner world long before it changes anything anyone can point to on the outside. And this season is for us to really learn everything about us that helps us notice that shift. We are going to slow down and observe ourselves to see what resonates. Where do we want to grow? And where do we want to stay? And where do we want to return back to? Not to judge it, rather to understand it so we can remain with presence of mind, which will allow us to navigate any pressure while grounded in ourself. Now, with that, let's take a moment to really understand what exactly do we mean when we say pressure. And is this measure of it universal? Can the exact same scenario feel like pressure to one person while not so much for another? The answer, most of us know, is a no. How and what creates a sense of pressure could be very different for each one of us. What feels manageable for one person may feel overwhelming for another, not because of strength or weakness, but because of what else is being carried out at the very same time. Context matters. History matters. Capacity matters. And in this sense, we can see pressure is a lived condition that is unique to every person. It becomes a combination of how much and how long that goes past a threshold that our mind, nervous system, and body can safely carry. And that internal shift, where we start losing our grounding to pressure, comes when we combine the accumulation of the source of pressure with time, as in limited to no time and space to integrate or rest and recuperate from the pressure. There really is no universality to measuring pressure for a human. And this makes it important that we do not compare and we do not judge. Rather, we focus on recognizing the impact of pressure on us so we can navigate it with the right strategies and without burning out within ourselves. Recognizing pressure in this way is not about labeling anything as wrong. It is about establishing a shared understanding that pressure is not defined by comparison or severity. If something has required sustained adaptation on our part, it counts. If something has narrowed our internal space so we can process and recuperate over time, it matters. This shared understanding is important because without it, pressure either gets exaggerated or ignored. And neither helps us remain connected to ourself as life continues to move. And to navigate pressure more effectively within our mind, nervous system, and body, we must remain centered, grounded, and connected to ourself. Because what begins to change first under pressure is not our behavior. It is how we are oriented inside of ourselves. Before anything becomes visible on the outside, there's a subtle internal adjustment that takes place. Our attention starts to narrow. Our sense of internal space to process and allow all parts of our mind to collaborate begins to get smaller. It begins to shrink. The way we relate to our own thoughts, our emotions, and bodily signals start to feel slightly different than it did before. And this shift is easy to miss because nothing appears drastically broken. Life continues to move, responsibilities continue to be met, and yet we find our inner posture where we once moved with ease and confidence starts to feel less accessible. For our listeners who have been on this journey with us from season 1, the next point I'm about to make is not a new one. When we recognize the shift internally resulting from pressure, it is so important not to meet it with harshness or self-judgment. Why? Because this is the fastest way for our nervous system to shut down. And a shut down nervous system reduces our effectiveness to navigate pressure. Harshness and judgment are threats. They're not a safety system. Our nervous system operates best in conditions of repetition in safety. So it is important for us to understand that our internal shifts during extended periods of pressure is not a failure of capability. It is a natural response based on how our mind, our nervous system, and body function. And another point we have to keep in mind in these internal responses to external pressure is that it is unique to each one of us, based on the range of conditioning we have absorbed over our lifetimes. We have been trained our entire life to operate a certain way. The first change is often the loss of internal reference. We stop checking in with ourselves as naturally or consistently as we once did when pressure goes on for a period of time. Our internal signals are still present, but they tend to arrive later, or they are overridden by what feels most pressing or urgent in the moment. Decisions can also start being made before there's time or full internal clarity to even form. And at the same time, our mental bandwidth can shrink, it can narrow. We may notice that it becomes harder to hold multiple perspectives at the same time. Thinking can become more linear and task-focused, not because we've just suddenly lost the ability to think deeply, but because the pressure we are facing has now created internal conditions that no longer allow for the same level of integration to happen. Alongside all of this, our nervous system can sense pressure as the threat, and it can take on a more protective posture. So now, our entire being feels the subtle but persistent sense of readiness, an impending sense of catastrophe, as if something might need to be handled at any moment. Even in moments meant for rest, our nervous system is not able to fully settle down. Our attention starts leaning forward. We become vigilant. We start scanning because we are anticipating what may come next. And what does this do? Now, all of our resources have been assigned to anything and everything, rather than staying with what is here and in the now, which is the only moment that can make a difference for us, regardless of pressure. The past is just a reference point, Yes, one filled with context, experience, and lessons. The future is just an idea. It is your now, the current moment that we are in, that can make a difference. Coming back to the shifts, extended pressure can cause inside of us past our mind. Our body reflects this shift as well. Pauses do not restore in the same way it once did for us. When we sit still, it can begin to feel uncomfortable or even unproductive. Physically, our body can feel tensed and tight all the time. Immunity can go down and recovery can take longer, and we remain exhausted. And we cannot overlook how, in time, these shifts can affect our sense of internal trust. We may find ourselves relying more heavily on external cues, timelines, and expectations to guide us. It is not that our ability to access our inner knowing has suddenly disappeared. It is simply that now it has become harder to access in real time, especially when decisions need to be made quickly. And when these internal shifts are present for a period of time, they begin to quietly influence how we meet our everydays. We may not even notice it immediately because nothing's looking drastically different. We are still moving along, we are still responding, we are still deciding, we are still just moving through life. And yet, the way we are doing so has shifted subtly, gradually. With our internal shifts, our responses can start coming from a place of protection rather than presence. And what does that mean? When we make choices, we can start to form it around what feels the safest, the fastest, or least disruptive. We may find ourselves prioritizing completion, checking off a box over quality, speed over discernment and alignment. And in these moments, we are not necessarily consciously choosing to move this way. We are adapting. Our mind, our nervous system, and body simply wants to reduce the perceived threats that pressure is bringing our way. If we stand back and observe this, we will note that what quietly shifted is our reference point. Instead of orienting from within ourselves and grounding in the now to engage outwards, we have started orienting from what is happening around us and reacting inwards. So we are letting the external world reorient our internal being. And this is how pressure starts shaping our default ways of responding, not through dramatic change, but through repeated, subtle adjustments that slowly become familiar to us. That slowly becomes our way of operating when conditions of pressure come our way. And as this external orientation becomes more familiar under pressure, we will find typically that certain patterns begin to show up in how we think, how we decide, and how we move through our lives. We may notice that we are holding back longer before acting or speaking, or even when clarity is present. And at other times, we may move more quickly than we intended to, driven by the need to resolve something rather than fully understand it, so we can get it over with. We may find ourselves avoiding conversations or decisions that feel complex or emotionally demanding because they require more internal capacity than feels available in the moment. What is important to notice here is not the pattern itself, but how quietly it settles in. These shifts don't announce themselves as changes. They feel reasonable in the moment, necessary even. Holding back can feel thoughtful. Moving quickly can feel responsible. Avoiding something complex can feel like conserving energy. And because these responses often help us get through what's immediately in front of us, we don't question them right away. They begin to feel like appropriate ways to operate under pressure. And over time, this is how certain ways of thinking and deciding and responding start to become familiar, not because they were always aligned with our beliefs, morals, and values, but because they felt workable, doable in the conditions we are in. One of the first patterns that become very noticeable under sustained pressure is how we relate to action, taking action, movement. At times, we may find ourselves holding back longer than we normally would, even when clarity is present. Even when we have thought something through, there can be a hesitation to act or to speak because we don't know what matters. But because moving forward now feels as though it carries more risk than it once did. This holding back can feel responsible, it can feel thoughtful, it can feel like taking time to be careful. And in those many moments, it may genuinely be those things. And when pressure has been present for a while, this hesitation can begin to show up more frequently and in places where it didn't exist before and where it is not the most effective approach. Decisions that once felt straightforward now start to feel heavier. Conversations that once felt manageable begin to feel more loaded. The space between knowing and acting stretches, and the stretch of delaying can be the familiar part. What is important to notice here is not whether hesitation is right or wrong, but how it begins to shape our internal experience. Over time, we may feel less anchored in our own sense of timing. We may start questioning ourselves more than we need to. And even when we do move forward, it can feel like we are pushing past our own selves rather than moving with ourselves. Another pattern can begin to take shape under sustained pressure, shows up on the opposite end of the spectrum with action. Instead of holding back, we may find ourselves moving more quickly than we intend to. Decisions get made faster. We feel an internal pull to resolve, to conclude, to decide, not necessarily because clarity has arrived, but because staying with uncertainty starts to feel uncomfortable. Moving quickly can feel productive. It can feel decisive. It can feel relieving in the moment, especially when pressure has been building and there's a desire to create space. And in many situations, moving quickly is exactly what is needed. What's important to notice is when speed begins to replace discernment, when the need to get this done outweighs the need to fully understand what's unfolding, when the action becomes a way to reduce internal tension rather than a response that is aligned with what we know to be the right next step. And over time, this pattern can subtly shape how we experience ourselves again. We may notice that we move ahead before we have clarity at all times. We may arrive at decisions that technically make sense, but don't quite sit right once that moment has passed. And instead of feeling grounded after taking that action or decision, we feel a quiet need to keep moving so we don't even have to think about it or contemplate it anymore. Another way these internal shifts can begin to show up under sustained pressure is in how freely we allow ourselves to express what we are sensing or feeling in the moment. At times, we may find ourselves containing more of ourselves than we used to. We choose our words carefully. We hold things back. We back away. We stay composed. We stay controlled, even when something inside of us wants to be expressed or acknowledged. This self-containment can feel appropriate. It can feel mature. It can feel like maintaining stoicism, stability when conditions already feel demanding. And yet, over time, this compression can begin to take its toll. We may notice that we are always less open, less engaged, and simply less available, because that's our familiar state. What we share becomes filtered through what feels safe to express rather than what is true to express. We will find ourselves performing the appearance of regulation for the external world. And this performance is coming from an internal space that is tightening to feel safe. At other times, especially when pressure has continued without space to settle, the opposite can also happen. Instead of containing ourselves, we may find moments of overwhelm, emotions coming through more intensely, reactions coming faster, words are spoken with more force or urgency than we intend. What has been held in for a while can come out all at once because our internal capacity to hold it in has been stretched beyond what it can comfortably hold. These moments can feel so confusing. We may not recognize ourselves in them. Others won't recognize us. We may wonder how we went from holding everything together to suddenly feeling flooded. But both self-containment, compression, and overwhelm, explosion are responses to the same underlying condition. Extended pressure without enough internal space to integrate and recover, and a pattern of behavior that has now become default. In both cases, what is affected is not our intention for our choices. What truly got affected is our ability to access our conditioned patterns learned in the face of threat by mind, nervous system, and body. And with that, let us move to closing out this first episode for our season 3 of Catalyze Your Self. The goal of our first episode is to set the stage for the rest of our season. We are at the beginning of our journey this season towards strengthening our steadiness under pressure. In our episode today, we focused on what pressure actually does before anything changes on the outside. We spent time understanding how extended periods of pressure quietly shift our internal orientation and how our defaults begin to form and how these patterns start shaping the way we think, we decide, and respond in everyday life. And now I want to share a couple of reflective considerations for all of us to sit with. Where have we noticed pressures shaping how we respond, even when things still appear to be functioning just perfectly well? And which pattern from today that we just covered felt most familiar in how we operate under pressure? I hope this episode resonated with each and every one of us. Let us all stay connected so we can continue this work together. Please feel free to reach out to me through any of the platform this podcast is shared on. Please share your thoughts and experiences so all of us can learn and grow together. And please share with anyone you feel would love to join us on this journey. And next week, in episode 2, we move to focus on what happens when inner ground is lost. We'll take a closer look at what it feels like when those internal shifts continue and our sense of internal steadiness starts to feel less accessible, and why recognizing that moment matters. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Gayatri, and until next time, let us all stay grounded, stay connected to ourselves, and continue to strengthen our mind.